software can choose to do it more slowly if it wishes to, if it knows a batch of updates are available. It's really up to the controller whether it bumps it up frequently or occasionally.
That's true. Yeah.
The data plane doesn't decide on its own.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so you could imagine somebody knowing like, oh, I've got a huge ACL update and 100 routing updates or something like that. It could do all those and then bump the generation number up once.
Yeah. That would be the case. Yeah.
And that's per ENI, and that basically means effectively when you bump, like for ENI 57, if you bump the generation up from 2 to 3, all the flow table entries for generation 2 with ENI 64 are now going to be missed and age out, and new ENI 64 generation 3 entries will be created in a burst if packets arrive for ENI 64 in a burst.
Yeah, but they don't age out, right? It's all packet triggered. So if
I mean the old generation entries don't age out, they stay there.
The old generation entry, what happens is that, well, I mean, of course, if you have a flow entry, that's going to age out irrespective of the generation changes, right? But what happens is that, you know, if you have a flow entry for which the generation ID has changed and there is no packet coming in, that entry does not get updated. Either it's going to age out or it's going to get updated only at the time when a packet comes in. Right?
But is the intent, suppose there's suppose for one particular flow there's a generation 2 entry, and then the generation for that ENA bumps up to 3, and another packet comes in for that flow. Is it going to have a key lookup exact match on generation 3 and get a miss, and then do the slow path and add a generation 3 entry, and the generation 2 entry is still there aging out? Or is that an implementation detail?
No, it will be replacement. It'll be the replacement of the entry. The generation 2 will not basically exist anymore.
So the generation 2 entry is supposed to, like the generation 2 is part of the result of the lookup, not the key?
No. Generation 2, let's say generation 2 was an older entry, right? And then you get a packet. The lookup is basically your whatever the float tuple lookup is plus the generation ID. So it's like the
So the old generation 2 key will still be there unless somebody control plane software comes in and deletes it, right?
Yes, exactly. It will always remain in there, and then like
until it ages out.
Until either ages out or the new packet comes in, right?
But the new packet won't force the old one to be deleted unless you write explicit code to make that happen, right?
That is true. That is true. I mean, the thing is going to happen is that as soon as the miss were to happen, in that case, or if there is a mismatch, it's like everything else matches except for the generation ID. Then
but tables only give you one hit or one miss, right? They don't tell you there was an almost hit.
No, I agree. But what happens is that there has to be some way to ensure that, okay, how we end up deleting the old entry, right?
Because and an aging might be good enough, but it's maybe, is that implementation specific or mandated by Dash that we should aggressively delete old entries? Like nothing in P4 will unless you do 2 lookups on the same table in P4, one for the current generation ID, one for the generation ID -1. You won't know if generation ID -1 exists in the table in the P4 code in the data plane, for example. The control plane can go in and scour them all out. When it bumps up the generation ID, it can scour and remove all the entries if it wants, but the data plane itself won't do it, right? Except by aging.
How about if you were to basically, since, you know, if there is a miss, and then at the miss point, when you're trying to create an entry for connection tracking purposes, because now essentially you are going through, you know, the same slow path, right? And in that slow path, what you're really doing is, you know, if you're creating a new entry, would you not actually go ahead and do a as part of that to do the match for the previous generation, and if that were to basically occur at that particular time, you delete it.
And I mean, that's certainly possible to, you know, to implement. It's not an automatic thing unless you go to the trouble of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not automatic. I agree. Yeah, it'll have to be implemented.
Okay, but it sounds like maybe this might be a quality of implementation issue, whether you aggressively delete them or you let aging take care of it, which could increase your tables, which increases the number of entries you need during that time if you let aging handle it.
Right. my recommendation, or at least the way I would do it, is that at the time when I'm creating a new entry and going through the flow path, I would look for the old entry, and if
Okay.
that were to be found, then I'll delete it. Right.
Okay. I mean, notice that, yeah, you'll be doing that for brand new flows too, that will miss and not find the old
Yes.
generation. And
That's
okay,
Andy,
but you'll spend
the
that lookup doing it.
reason I was being so quiet is I was looking up notes because I remember we talked about this and about the packet trigger, you know,
Okay.
and so I was just trying to remember. It's not that I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, no problem. No, I was
okay, yeah,
blasting with
do-
questions there, so
no,
I'll be quiet for a moment.
no, I was listening to you too, and I do remember we sort of talked about, but we talked about it in the HA work group. We didn't talk about it in the behavioral model group. Is that related, guys? Because I know we talked about this a lot with Vijay and Sanjay. When there's a config version change, we cache the version for the ENI that's maintained in the connection. Look at the version, maintain the connection for the ENI from when the last packet trigger. Is this like kind of the same thing?
Yeah, you're right. It was actually, yeah, it was discussed in HA.
But is this related? Is it related?
It sounds like it.
Okay, should I pop these notes into the chat window, or should we just talk about this here?
So, I mean, I think as long as the generation ID makes its way into the behavioral model code, that seems like a reasonable thing to happen sometime.
I'm gonna write that down. Gen ID should, thank God I take notes. Right into the P4 code you said? Okay.
Or, whatever the reference model code is for the data plane.
Got it.
Certainly having the generation ID as part of the key seems like a pretty important detail to test, I would think, when an implementation against.
Okay, I'm just going to put from former notes, blah. Okay. These were in HA. So yeah, sorry, I was just looking that up because it kind of triggered something in my memory. Okay. Okay.
And then if you wanted to go the extra mile, I could either say something or put something in chat of an extra sentence that.
Sure. Say it. Yeah,
I'll say it first and see if I get it right. So I guess it sounds like it's a implementation trade-off, just quality of implementation issue, whether you aggressively delete the old generation entries or you let them be aged out over time. But probably the reference model won't actually.
I can't remember if we talked about doing, was it a timer or a aging, or
I think all the entries in the flow cache have an aging parameter that can be changed at different TCP connection states or something. I thought.
Yeah. I thought.
So I think like if somebody said, oh yeah, I've got so much table space in my flow table in my implementation, I'll just let them be aged out gradually over time. I'm guessing.
I don't think anyone said that.
I don't think anybody's going to notice unless you run out of table entries and that affects your table space scaling limit. That's when you'd notice.
Yeah.
But if somebody aggressively deleted them, that would give them more breathing room for table space.
Yeah.
That sounds more like
you just have to.
It wouldn't affect the data.
The final.
It would only affect the maximum flow scale limitations you could reach.
And would you have to get like that final FINAC or whatever, be tracking?
Yeah, then there's that too. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That answers all my questions on that.
You.
Sorry for the.
Can't believe sometimes I have a fairly decent memory. Okay.
No, there's a lot of stuff discussed, and I'm like I say, I'm
track, right? Yeah.
I apologize for I may ask a few review questions for a while. I'm trying to catch up again after being.
Not at all.
Paying little attention for too long.
No, not at all. Did anyone else have something for Q&A since we don't have PR 308 to go through this week? And I do apologize. It was supposed to be this week.
Sorry
go ahead, honey.
Sorry to be sounding like a broken record. I keep coming back to this thing.
Roadmap.
No, just the BMB2, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all the things that basically, so that just wanted to see if, I know we have a lot of items that, people need to pick up or deliver it, right? In terms of, there's a big backlog, so to speak, right? So any progress on that area, that if you can talk about it, that would be great. Otherwise, If there's no progress, then I can probably think that, okay, we haven't made, any inroads in there, but just wanted to see if there are any progress in there.
So there hasn't been a lot of progress from the Microsoft side. We've been looking around for internal resources who maybe know P4, can do P4, reached out to MSR, Microsoft Research, looking for resources and people. And I think, y'all have seen resourcing issues with all the tech companies lately, and we haven't really seen much progress there. So that's where I'm at there. Oh, it looks like Vladimir's here. Sorry, I'm gonna let him in. So, I know that Marian had said last week he was focusing more on the next feature, which is service tunnel private link versus getting the what was it, the APIs and the compiler and all that. So maybe we can talk to him about that next week and see where we are. But it seems like we really only have, a couple of active resources working on it.
Okay.
So maybe I'll go learn P4. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to go learn P4.
Or maybe I can probably ask this question to Andy,
Sure.
is that, with all the new changes that we have basically brought into PNA, right? Has BMV2, at least in the P4 community, has the BMV2 caught up to those changes?
So I don't know if I'll give you my state of knowledge. So I did a survey a year or so ago of open source P4 Lang projects like the P4 compiler front end and open source backends, BMV2, the P4 runtime API, all those various GitHub projects. And I was curious. I mean, you may or may not know. I mean, this may be common knowledge, but like Linux is open source, but most of the people, and certainly anybody with the technical chops and gets past review can contribute code to it. And many, I'm sure many grad students and undergrads, and just people who are hobbyists have gotten code in the Linux kernel. But by and large, the vast majority of the code that gets Linux kernel is by people paid to develop it and test it. Just because, they're experts and they get, they have lots of time to do it because they're paid to do it. It turns out P4 Lang projects are very similar. Like probably 90% of lines of code that have been committed are by people paid to do it as part of their full-time job. Right now, behind boot on behavioral model, it's kind of been in maintenance mode. And Antonin Boss is at VMware and has been making bug fixes to it, but not making. I mean, he's not paid to make enhancements to it. I think his bug fixes have been mostly volunteer time on his part.
Yeah.
So anybody, like, it's open source, anybody can enhance it. But the people that tend to do so, even on P4C, tend to be people paid to do it full time. And nobody, to my knowledge, today at Intel is paid to enhance BMV2. Otherwise, you'd notice it in the open source repo. There are people at Intel paid full time to enhance P4C, and in particular the DPDK backend. There are people paid full time, like half a dozen people or so are paid to enhance the DPDK backend for P4 compiler. So it is tracking PNA pretty closely, adding features as PNA adds features. Does that mean you could just switch today from BMV2 to DPDK and everything would go smoothly? I really don't know, because I know that some of the changes, if I understand correctly, that folks at NVIDIA/Mellanox have made to BMV2 involve like these list and list port match kinds in the behavioral model code, which those are control plane. In my mind, those are like control plane and reference model only kind of changes. They're good for a reference model. They're good for the control plane API for Dash. They're not. They have no direct, simple, straightforward data plane implementation at high speed. Great for a reference model that you just care about a few hundred packets a second. So those are not implemented in DPDK, nor do I have any knowledge of anybody planning to implement DPDK. But if everything else is there that folks want, and I know there's SCI implement generation code, I don't know if that's tied to BMV2 or if that's independent of BMV2. Maybe other people here know. Anyway, so that's me spewing there for a while. I don't know if that
Mhm.
raises additional questions. Go ahead.
Andy, I'd like to comment on what you just said. This is Chris, the other luminary.
Yep.
So, just quickly, the list match type. My understanding is that syntactic sugar and not a necessary part of this. It could just be solved by sending more messages, right, from the control plane, because it probably gets expanded out anyway in a real implementation, right? It's just a concise way.
It's when you have like a source address list type and a desk address list type. The most obvious, straightforward implementation is do the cross product of the SA and DA lists,
right?
and
It's
that
just
turns into
syntactic
millions
sugar.
of entries in reasonable size configurations, I think. Which you could do in a
Sure.
software model if you have enough memory, and it'd be fine.
Yeah. Someone's
Yep.
going to be doing the expanding, and so whether it's in the control plane with a lot of round trips, or we create some control plane shortcut, right? But it doesn't have to be in the model itself, right? It doesn't have to be in the
It
data
needs to be
plane.
somewhere between the control plane and the model, or in the
Yeah.
model.
So just that, with that comment aside, I don't know of any other obstacles from what you said of switching to P4DPDK. And the benefits would be there are people working on it. It's open source, as far as I know, right?
Yep.
Everything's being done out in the open.
Yes.
And we'd have a little more, and would have reuse, right? It'd get a broad usage, whereas this BMV2 project we have in Dash is very, let's say,
Volunteer.
local. Well, no, it's very local. The use case is very local, and there's not, the rest of the world isn't going to necessarily be interested in it. Whereas P4DPDK, being generally useful and also much more performant, right, could be turned into commercial implementations. It seems like it's a better focal point.
And I will warn you, a caveat is I haven't tried to compile the current behavioral model P4 code on DPDK to see whether there's gaps in feature support there. That would be a quick exercise, but I haven't tried it yet. I can volunteer to try that out and see if there are any existing gaps.
It
next
seems
time.
like it'd be worth at least making some kind of a rough assessment of the practicality of switching to P4DPDK. And
Yep.
I would volunteer to help integrate it into the workflows if we can get some reality check first.
Yeah, I can try to do a reality check, at least in the form of does it even compile without syntax errors, without errors.
And just get an idea of what kind of cooperation you're going to get from people who already have probably missions to complete. If we need to rely on people who are P4DPDK savvy, are they going to be able to help us?
I'd want to assess what the gaps are, if there are any, first before commenting.
Okay.
Like I think there'd be low chance of saying, hey, can you please implement this list match kind? But if we, do the kind of cross-budgeting expansion in the control plane, some control plane middle layer for reference code, then they don't need to do that. So then the question is, what are there any other gaps that need covering? And I can do a quick analysis from the compiler point of view, and then actually running tests. If that goes well, then there's the issue of just try running the test and make sure there's no known bugs that in the behavior that we see with the code.
Yeah,
it is really newer than BMV2, so there might be bugs in it because it's newer and less battle tested. Yeah.
So to me, there's really three pieces to this puzzle. One is the execution engine, right? The P4DPDK itself, the platform. There's the compiler and tooling to generate, the code for that platform. And then there's the P4 code in our behavioral model, which also is not getting full attention, right? Just let's say we had a perfectly working BMV2 that met all of our dreams. There's not a lot of effort being done to write the actual code, right? There's just it's stalling out a little bit due to lack of, resources.
Whatever, yeah.
So even if Andy comes and gives it to us on a silver platter, it doesn't mean the work's going to get done beyond that, right? So in general, we need all these things solved. But it seems like P4DPDK is getting closer to reality. Seeing the presentations at the P4 workshop last year, right? It's almost complete. and it would be pretty performant.
Yeah, I mean, performance is certainly nice to have. I doubt it's a must-have for this project, the reference model code, but certainly nice.
Mhm.
It's not a must, but if we start doing certain use cases, like let's say CI/CD test cases that have more than just
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple of packets, right? We start having meaningful flows or larger setups. BMV2 is just going to, collapse right under the weight. It'll take all night to run, whereas something that can send 1 million packets per second or something is going to be much more exciting and useful.
But I'll just warn you that I won't be surprised if there's, some gaps there that we should try to scope out and find with
Sure.
which is hopefully low effort to find, the low hanging fruit gaps if there are any, and then there might be some subtler ones. But if it turns into subtler ones, then I suspect that's something the DPDK team will want bug reports on anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even just a high level reality check on comparing continuing down this path versus changing direction would be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And is it true? Do you know, Chris, that the sort of the SCI generation, API generation code that exists today isn't really tied to BMV2 in any way?
Correct. It's just P4 code to SCI header file. It's platform independent.
So
Now,
that wouldn't be affected by the use of that code, and the implementation of that code wouldn't need to be affected by such a change.
And what is platform dependent, sort of, is the current libsci code generator in the Dash project. It's generating code to translate SCI calls into P4 runtime calls, which fortunately P4 DPDK probably supports natively as well, right? P4 runtime.
It definitely should. Again, its implementation may have bugs that are implemented independent of BMV2's limitations in that area. So again, something to flush out. And but again, those are the kind of things, if they don't involve new language extensions, they're the kind of things they want bug reports on anyway.
Yeah. And then, there's always an optimization possibility if P4 DPDK uses the TDI layer internally. Could always bypass the serialization into P4 runtime and be more optimized, but that's a nice to have. Like on the Mount Evans implementation, right? It's natively translated from my understanding from SCI into the table-driven interface, which is another library binding, not a serialized interface like P4 runtime.
But that should only hopefully that's only an issue if you get to larger configurations.
Yeah, that's just side story. Oh, hi Reshma.
Hi, Chris. I'm so sorry, Christina, everyone, that
no
I
problem.
had to join. I couldn't join
That's
all
okay.
this while. Just I heard about the TDI, so I just want to say that in the soft switch that we were working on, we are basically integrating the programming layers like TDI, etc., directly into the syncd of Sonic container. Syncd container of Sonic.
Oh.
So it will be a direct call. It is not going to be anything like an extra RPC, which we want to avoid. It will all be in the single, so yeah, that's the advantage of it. Yeah.
So, Andy and I were having a chat about
stream of consciousness chat.
BMV2 versus DPDK, and
Christina's trying to take notes. Sorry.
I can take notes.
Go ahead,
No,
go
I
ahead,
like
Chris.
to learn.
And I was just giving an opinion that maybe it's worth reconsidering the P4 DPDK soft switch as the behavioral model platform, but we don't really know the status of it in terms of how close it is.
So in the P4 DPDK, we wanted to ensure that the necessary components are implemented so that we can actually utilize and implement the dash.p4 using those hardware block types. So it is all available at this moment. I'm not sure what you may have discussed. I will actually go through the recording, but we can discuss some more next time if needed. But
I can catch you up later today, Reshma.
Sure, thank you. so much. So we want to basically implement the dash.p4 on DPDK. That is our goal at this time. And then, we have already been working on the soft switch earlier. In the a few months ago, at that time we had a pause because we needed some more functionality implemented in the P4 DPDK, but I think we have all that now, so we could accelerate that. Yeah, and once we implement that, we would like to open source that.
Yeah, and also Rashma, so I provided with the links to the P4 DPDK targets, which can be used as an engine to run the programs, P4 program, I mean, and compile. And also there is some examples like connection tracking that just examples, there is no there is no dash,
Yeah.
right? There is just example of some programs.
Yeah, so we want to, we have the connection tracking will be Dash connection tracking. What we're talking here is in context of Dash. So Dash connection tracking will be implemented in the P4 DPDK in the sense we already have the add-on miss construct implemented. With that already present, then it is possible for us to do this. It's very simple.
So one of the things I volunteered for, Reshma, before you joined, I think maybe was I can take the latest version of the P4 code checked into the Dash repo and just run it through the P4C DPDK compiler and see if there's any gaps or in its implementation and support for anything, and report back to other folks just to get that first pass of anything missing or not.
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah. Previously, I think there are some other constructs in BMV2 today, like the range port list and port list for utilized for ACCESS, etc. So wondering if that can be pushed into or upstream to p4.org, if it is useful for everyone from the BMV2 side as well. Yeah.
Sorry, the range one or the list one?
Both, right? Yeah.
Okay, the range one I'll check with Christian on DPDK to see whether they implemented already or not. I do recall there being maybe a limitation there on the current implementation that they do power 2 ranges only. On the list type, Chris and I talked about it before you joined perhaps, and it might be that the best thing there would be not to push that into P4, like the language spec or the implementation, but there's a way to basically, for small enough configurations, you can say, take some layer, middle layer of the control plane, expand those out into a cross product in some control plane software to make the configurations become much bigger in the data plane, but it's functionally correct.
Okay, some
but for a
version
reference
of
model that might be reasonable.
Yeah, if it is reasonable, that's fine. If there is more to it, I don't see Marianne joined.
No, he had a conflict today, so we started talking. We started talking about, it was like, is the key generation when we were doing some flow stuff, and then we morphed into Hanif asked about, has BMV2 caught up in P4 community, and that started this conversation, Reshma. So we didn't have Marianne or Prince today. They had a conflict.
I see. Got it. Yeah. So Andy, as we had spoken earlier, and you had pointed out the range list and the port list that's there in BMV2, we can discuss, if it is beneficial for NVIDIA to sort of upstream that, or if there is a different version of that, whatever we think is a better version, we should definitely ensure that gets into the P4.org.
Yeah. I guess a quick question, Chris, or anybody here. I mean, suppose we did the cross product thing. So imagine my understanding is there's a config you could do. So you could say, oh, here's 1,000 source address prefixes. Here's 1,000 destination address prefixes. The obvious dead simple way in the control plane middleware I'm thinking of would be produce the 1,000 times 1,000 entries that have one source IP and dest IP prefix each and matches the same way. So that'd be 1,000,000. So if you just, on your reference model, if you just give it enough memory and table size that it can take 1,000,000 entries, it will eventually match through all those and give you a result, but it might be slow in the control plane and slow in the data plane. Is that got enough gas mileage in it for the kind of things you want to run the reference model on?
Well, I guess I'll answer it like this. It's a lot better than we have now.
I see.
Which is
Okay.
none. And even if we did implement list match type now in BMV2, it would never get close to the scale and performance of a presumptive P4DPDK implementation, right? So it's better than nothing, right? Even if we
Okay.
say, well, for CI/CD and software testing, we'll limit ourselves to a total of 1 million entries or 100,000 or whatever. We'll come up with something that we can live with. It's still better than nothing.
Okay.
Beggars can't be choosers. So if we get some implementation, it would be great.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
at least
I'm just pointing out the scaling limitations would probably be way below what the dash requirements are.
yeah, it's not meant to replace a DPU. It might just provide an emulator that we can do functional evaluation of our P4 code. And
Yeah,
write
but
test
not at the
cases.
largest config scales, perhaps.
Not at
No,
the
no.
largest config scales, but yeah, I think it should be more performant for sure. Otherwise,
Okay.
No, I
just
agree. I think
wanted to
this
double
is-
check that and see if anybody had any reactions or concerns there.
Yeah, no, I think, as long as it basically allows us to emulate, certain reasonable number, we don't have to basically probably scale up to what the hardware might, eventually provide. But one thing, guys, maybe there is a very simple answer to this one or a brief answer to this one. But, when, at least in my view, whenever I look at BMV2, I see this is a soft switch. And at least my understanding was DPDK was not a soft switch. So why is, why
They
should
both
one be
are.
the alternative to the other? Okay.
They both are. They both
Oh,
run
so
in general purpose
DPDK.
CPUs.
Okay.
they
So
both run on the host. Yeah.
They're both
Yeah,
just
they
C
both run.
programs. They're both just C programs, right?
But
Yep.
in the past, whenever I looked at this thing, people basically used OVS with DPDK to really have some sort of a solution to do the soft switch part. But are we saying that now DPDK has been enhanced to have the soft switch capability as well?
Oh, DPDK is just a pipeline that runs in the host, right? There could be other control planes that is utilizing and writing to that pipeline in the host. It could be OVS. In our case, we want it to be Sonic and running Dash, and the Dash and the pipeline to be Dash specific. And Sonic is the control plane that will be writing into that pipeline.
I mean, DPDK is just a toolkit for writing user mode data plane programs, right? It's just like a set of frameworks and libraries. You can do anything in it. And the genius is that Intel have been creating a P4 framework so that implement all the P4 constructs like lookup tables and registers and parsers in the DPDK framework.
And it just translates it to C and compiles it and runs it.
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially it can be a replacement for the BMV2, right?
A major superset of it in some regards, yeah, in terms of
Okay.
performance. It may not, but there have to be choices made in terms of actual implementation. It may not do everything that BMV2 does the same way, right? It may have different kinds of limits.
Yeah.
So
It's an independent implementation, and we may hit different edge cases than you've seen before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we haven't hit that many edge cases because not a lot of tests run in BMV2.
And BMV2 is like BMV2 is kind of an engine. BMV2 is kind of an engine. It reads a JSON file and then executes, kind of it's like it's kind of a runtime engine that reads a JSON file, which is the output of the P4C compiler backend, and then says, okay, I have all these capabilities. I'm going to configure myself to be this pipeline based on the JSON file that it runs.
Right.
Whereas the DPDK is probably a lot more optimized, right? It probably compiles more bespoke code based on your P4 program, I would guess.
I would say it's a reasonable analogy to say BMV2 is more like an interpreter and DPDK is more like a compiler. Its treatment of P4 code.
Like a code generator or some mix in between.
Yeah. Yeah, this was going to be my next question, but thanks for explaining this thing. This is great. One thing is, at least going back into the P4 nomenclature where we have, P4 target, the P4 architecture, the P4 behavior model, and so forth, right? When we actually look at BMV2, at least, from the documentation point of view, that it is a soft switch as a target for which we have certain architectures, P4 architectures defined, one of them being like V1 model to speak with, right? So when it comes to, say, DPDK target, P4 DPDK target, do we have a list of architectures that have been defined for us so that we could perhaps, write to it?
Yes.
Primarily,
So
we have,
BMV2 today implements V1 model only fully. There's a little bit of work done on PSA, but it's not done and nobody's working on it. DPDK has both the portable switch architecture and portable NIC architectures implemented for it. If not 100%, they're over 90% now and still working on it.
Yeah, and the primary focus is PNA architecture, which is more applicable for us in using Dash here.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anything else for today, guys? That was a good conversation. I'll send out notes. I always learn
way less
something.
time than before.
Well, yeah. But I always learn something. I always learn something in these conversations, and so that's good. And thanks for the questions, Hanif, and the answers from everyone on the call. And so I'll go ahead and end it. I don't send out notes every time, but I'll send out notes this time. And what were you going to say, Andy?
If I could have one more quick question,
Yeah.
just for my exercise, is it just latest master or main branch version of the P4 code is what I should start with? There's no reason to go to some other branch or anything?
Me?
You or anybody else on the call
No.
that knows?
I'm the wrong person.
Do you mean, John, so do you mean the P4 DPDK targeted repo? Or
BMV2
the Sonic Dash repo, the one that has some P4 reference code in it, the latest main or master version is the one I should be starting with and
yes.
massaging?
Yeah.
I think so.
You should.
I
Okay,
hope
there's no,
that
I don't need to go to some
everything-
branch or something to find the latest version.
Main would
Okay.
be a good
We
starting
haven't
point.
had any.
Do you want me to ask Marian real quick?
Yet.
Yes, I think Marianne should confirm that unless, if there's anything else that is not in the P4C, etc., that he has in,
So
Okay.
in privately.
Yeah, not urgent. I'll start with the latest main or master. All I'm planning to do is just try to get it to compile and see what happens.
So
and
the
then
question is everything we need published on Dash?
as far as P4 reference model code, yeah.
Yes, so
And
it
is
looks
it
like.
and is it on a special branch or is it in main or master, whatever the
I think the main
Okay.
one is the master one. John, so just to clarify, so you want to try to run the reference dash P4 program on the DPDK?
Well, first just compile, and then if that goes well, then next step.
I'm not sure that you will be able to compile. Probably you will need to change it or fix it,
Yep.
right? Because it's V1 and DPDK is PNA. So
Yep,
you'll need to
yep.
fix it anyway, just
Sure.
to compile it.
Okay. I think I'll see how long that takes, but I can hack quickly when I try to go for a particular quick result first, and then worry about being careful later.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Okay. Sorry, I was just writing. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and I will stop the recording. And I hope you all